Okay, great. Good to see you. Sounds like my voice is carrying. I want to begin with a scripture. This is 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verses 4 through 9. Chapter 4, verses 9 through 10. And let's see if I can read this without my glasses. So it begins. This is the Apostle Paul addressing the Thessalonians, and he says, "For indeed, that indeed is what you have been doing for all the brothers throughout Macedonia. But I urge you, brothers, to do this more and more, and to aspire to live quietly and to mind your own affairs." Another way to render that is mind your own business. And work with your hands as we instructed you, so that you may properly live properly or walk properly before outsiders and be dependent on no one. To be dependent on no one. So work with your hands, mind your own business, so that you can live independently and be dependent on no one. Let's pray. Father, I pray that what I have to share this evening will be helpful. May the words of my mouth and meditations of my heart be blessed and useful and pleasing in your sight. In Christ's name, amen. So I want to begin. I've been doing a lot of thinking about artificial intelligence because I'm working on a book on the theme. And I'm going to quote something from Elon Musk. He knows a little bit about it. This is from a podcast, the All In podcast. It was recorded on September 9th, 2024. The rate of improvement of AI is faster than any technology I've ever seen by far. The good future of AI is one of immense prosperity in an age of abundance. No shortage of goods and services. Everyone can have whatever they want, except for things we artificially define as scarce, like special artwork. I like how he puts that, artificially defined as scarce. No, it actually is scarce. There's only one Mona Lisa. It's just the way it is. But anyway, getting back to the point. But with the advent of AI plus robotics, any manufactured good or provided service will tend to zero cost. I'm not saying it will actually become zero, but everyone will be able to have anything they want. That's the good future. In my view, that's probably 80% likely. And only 20% probability of human annihilation. There's a nice thought. Only 20%. Frankly, I do have to engage in some degree of deliberate suspension of disbelief with respect to AI to sleep well. Because I think the actual issue, the most likely issue, is how to find meaning in a world where AI can do everything we can do, but better. So this isn't like, some clown on InfoWars or Steve Bannon's War Room. This is Elon Musk. This is what he's up to. This is what he's working on. He's not the only one. By the way, we're all going to have to use AI. We already are. So just so you know, I don't have any strange notions that we're going to escape the use of AI. The challenge for us is how to use it. So I want to reflect a little bit on the nature of work. And one of the things that I came across here recently is it's a documentary by a documentary firm out of Germany. If you look on Google, or not Google, but YouTube, the channel is DW. When I came across it, I thought Daily Wire, right? That's not what it means. It means German wave, Deutsch for German, and then the German word for wave. And it specializes in documentaries, and they're very well done. There's no narrator. It's just interviews with people, and they segue from person to person. And the particular documentary I was sort of drawn into is a documentary entitled After Work. And the implication is that there's a post-work world that we're entering. Now, this got my attention for a lot of reasons, and I'm going to return to the theme of work, and particularly the Reformed understanding of the doctrine of vocation and how central that is and how non-negotiable it is for us. In other words, this isn't something that we can just welcome gladly. We have to really think about what this means. But anyway, the documentary begins with a vignette with a man from South Korea using a computer, and he's sitting next to his daughter, but he's completely engrossed in the computer, and he's describing his daily routine. He says he wakes up at 6 o'clock every morning, and he's at work by 6, or 7, I should say. He's up at 6, but he's at work by 7, and he works until 11 o'clock every day. Goes to bed at midnight, wakes up the next day at 6, and he's been doing this for his entire working life. Welcome to Korea. It's not that unusual. That's sort of the norm, and that's the problem. His daughter is asked about him, and she says he has no friends. Work is the thing he lives for, and if that was taken from him, he'd have nothing. So this is the world of work that he experiences. What it means, of course, is no family life, and one of the consequences, should have been foreseeable, but apparently it wasn't, is South Korea has the lowest fertility rate in the world. In fact, there's a movement in South Korea. It's called the Four No's. Are you familiar with the Four No's? So the relationship between the sexes is very bad in South Korea. Essentially, women don't want to get married or have kids or be with men. So the Four No's stand for no dating, no sex, no marriage, no children. So they've gone on strike. Anyway, this is such a problem. The problem not only in terms, speaking of the problem of overwork, but the fact that there is no family life. The government's had to intervene and actually shuts the power off so nothing works, and people have to go home. That's the new policy, forcing people to go home. Your computer just automatically shuts off. And they show it. They show this particular office where this is the case, and everybody's rushing because they can see the clock winding down, and they've got trying to get their work in and their computers, turned off before the power goes off, because it just will go off when it goes off. Anyway, that's not necessarily the best approach, in my opinion, but they're desperate. This was followed up by a treatment of what's going on in Italy, which has one of the highest youth unemployment rates in the world. In the EU, they're not actually the country with the highest youth unemployment. That's Spain. In Spain, it's 25% youth unemployment. When I say youth, I'm not talking about teenagers. I'm talking about people in their 20s. And in Italy, it's 20%. And the phenomenon was explained in the documentary by an economist who's describing the problem of NEET. Are you familiar with the term NEET? Not N-E-A-T, but N-E-E-T. It stands for no employment, nor education, nor training. So these are young people who have none of those things, but they're tremendously happy because they've got lots of free time and they've got no shortage of money. And why do they have as much money as they do? Because most of them are only children. Again, the fertility crisis has already, occurred there in Italy, and there's not much motivation to work because they all know they're going to receive a very large inheritance. That's one of the other unforeseen developments with regard to low birth rates. When you have a lot of kids, many of those kids know that when the inheritance is divided up, it's not going to amount to much. But when you're the only kid, you're getting it all. The house at the beach, the house in the mountains, the house in town, it's all going to be yours. So, that kind of retirement mindset sets in at 25. Watch that documentary and just observe what's going on with those kids. Then the documentary moves to Kuwait. Are you familiar with Universal Basic Income, UBI? The idea that we'll need to just pass out money in a world where no one needs to work? Well, Kuwait is an experiment in that because no one needs to work. Why? It's a small country and very wealthy, and everybody gets a check because of the way the government orders things there. So no one really has to work. Consequently, nobody does. Even people who want to work, there's actually nothing to do. That's the problem. So they interview a guy, and he describes the situation. He says, there's essentially 20 people for every job. And then he describes his experience working for the government. There's another woman who's interviewed, and she said, I've only done one thing in 6 months, and that was deliver a note. 6 months, that's all I did. Now you might think, well, these people are just having a lot of fun playing solitaire, right? They're not, they're miserable. They just don't feel like their lives have any significance or worth. They have lots of people who are working for them. They're all Filipinos. The average household in Kuwait has 2 maids, both from the Philippines. And you see people working all over the place, but they're all expats. They're all people who've been brought in. And when the people from Kuwait are interviewed, they say essentially they're slaves, if not robots. We don't really think about them very much. We actually talk about them in a kind of derogatory way right in front of them sometimes. It's just the way it is. So that's what you find. And the most thoughtful person that is interviewed is this young Kuwaiti man who is really despondent about the situation. He says, I live in a country of incompetence. If anything were to fall apart, if the country were to fall apart, we would just be completely lost because no one knows how to do anything. That's the situation in Kuwait. So this is not science fiction. This is our world today. Now, as I think about the United States, I'd like to make a few very unscientific observations about the state of work in our country. David Bahnsen wrote a book on work where he was, basically telling us to get back to work. And I'm all for work. When I was younger, I worked 60 to 80 hours a week. I look back on it now and I think, how did I do that? I had so much energy. I was involved in all kinds of stuff. I was pastoring a growing church. I was teaching college courses. I was involved in real estate. I had 18 tenants. I had plenty to do. I had property in 3 states. I had a lot of things to keep me going. And I had 3 kids and a wife that homeschooled. So, I was pretty busy. So I believe in work. I think work's great. In fact, I derive a lot of satisfaction through my work. I enjoy it. I enjoy writing. I'm at a stage of life now where I'm not as physically active as I used to be. It's a little more challenging to get up on the roof to fix something. I think I'll pay somebody to do that. I'm at that stage of life. But anyway, when it comes to our country, I'd like to make some unscientific observations. First of all, we still have the strongest GDP in the world by a long shot. When it comes to income per household, when you think about the size of our nation, it's remarkable that we're in the top 10. We're actually number 7. You know who's number 1 is Luxembourg, right? Tiny, so tiny you can't even find it on a map. You're like, where is that place? That's number 1, because they do the banking in Europe, right? And then Switzerland, of course, and Singapore, but they're all tiny countries. Every other nation in the top 10 are just, little mice compared to the 800-pound gorilla of the United States. So, we're very productive. I just looked at the list of the top 50 companies in the world. I think the top 37 are American. Europe is just embarrassing. Japan, only 1. Toyota. That's the only Japanese company in the top 50. Now, I remember the 1980s when we thought Japan was going to, take over the country. You remember, Back to the Future, and they sort of, anyway. But we have transitioned, though, I think, in terms of the way a lot of people think about, how their lives can be enriched. We've moved from productivity to consumption in many cases. It's not always, I still think we still have a very strong entrepreneurial culture. I think we're the envy of the world when it comes to entrepreneurism. Nevertheless, I think it's not hard to see that we've transitioned in terms of measuring someone's worth by the things that they own as opposed to the things that they make. We as well are struggling with family non-formation. We have birth rates that are in decline, and it's been the case for a while, and marriage as well, marriage rates in decline. And individualism and self-definition are more or less where people look to find meaning in life. I remember I was in Beverly Hills not too long ago. I was speaking at a church in Los Angeles, and I said to my wife, she was down there with me, I said, let's go over to Beverly Hills just to check it out, drive around. And so we drove around for a little while. We saw a lot of pretty Tony-looking people. I didn't see any kids, though. There was not a kid for miles. There were lots of cats and dogs and strollers and stuff. It was kind of creepy, weird, right? It's kind of Kardashians with their cats. It's kind of, getting into their Ferrari and that kind of thing. It was a lot of that. But kids just weren't anywhere to be seen. I do think, too, and I'm glad to see that there's been a reversal in this trend, but I think for a while now, we've been suffering from kind of the cult of self-esteem, and trophies for all is kind of the approach to life. Sort of like taking the values of T-ball and applying them to the Ivy League. Saying, okay, everybody gets a trophy, participation, that kind of thing. You get to the Ivy League and you're still coloring books, and you're in safe spaces and stuff like that. It really is what you had. And then I think that there is a lot of discouragement because a number of young people believe that adulting, kind of launching, getting out into the world and doing things is almost impossible. And I admit, things were a lot more affordable when I graduated from college. I graduated from college in 1985. When I looked at the cost of college relative to income, that was the lowest point in terms of college cost in the history of the United States. So that was a good time to graduate from college. And you look at it today, and it really is pretty overwhelming in terms of the cost. And that's one of the reasons why there's been such a big pushback when it comes to higher education and so forth. And I think it's long overdue. But consequently, we've got a lot of young people who are discouraged. I bought my first home in Boston in 1994, and I only had $5,000 in my pocket. I bought a two-family for $136,000. I went on Zillow the other day and I checked out the cost of that place. Guess what it's going for today? $1.2 million. I just died inside. Why did I sell that place? I thought I was making a really smart move when I did. I made a lot of money, but I didn't make that kind of money. But anyway, and then even though all these things are going on, there's something else kind of in the background, and I think a lot of younger people are more aware of the impending AI storm than many of us are, because they kind of live with the stuff that's being developed and being introduced more than we tend to. There is a kind of post-work fever dream that has kind of set in with a lot of young people. A lot of young people today say things like, why save for retirement? Everything's going to be virtually free by the time I get to 65. I mean, this is literally what young people are saying. So some of the incentives have been removed. What I do like to think, though, about with you is the nature of work and its significance. There's a slogan that the Reformed are known for, and it's Semper Reformanda, always reforming. Are you familiar with that term, always reforming? Basically, what this implies is that we live in a fallen world, and there's a kind of entropy that's always at work. And in order to maintain standards, you have to keep at it constantly, because there's always the decay and the decadence of the world that we find ourselves that affects us. So, and this is something that the Reformed believed didn't just apply to liturgy or doctrine, it applied to just everything. You just have to constantly be on your guard, because we live in it's sort of like, being on a conveyor belt and you're walking against the direction of the belt. You have to walk really fast to make any progress. That's the nature of things in a fallen world. Because if you just kind of let things go, what happens? Have you ever seen those websites that just document the basically nature kind of reclaiming land as it just essentially just like envelops and consumes a house? All that you need to see have happen in order for a house to just collapse and be lost forever is just leave it alone. Nature will take its course and swallow it. That's what we're getting at when it comes to Semper Reformanda. We have to keep at this all the time. It's not as though we can just ever take a break and say, okay, we got that. We got the house painted. We're good for the next 5,000 years. No, we're going to have to paint it again in 10 years. This is just the way it is. Maintenance is huge. So I think Semper Reformanda addresses that. And we have to keep returning to first principles. So the situation on the ground does change. Things are different at different points in time and history. Once upon a time there were no airplanes, now there are. Once upon a time there were no smartphones, now there are. By the way, I've been a late adopter all the way along. I remember driving through Boston and seeing those little curly Q antennas on the back of like BMWs and thinking to myself, you don't need a phone in your car, you're just showing off. Now I've got I'm constantly online. I've got my phone, and anyway, I've learned my lesson. These things do tend to progress. Now, what I'd like to think with you a little bit about is the doctrine of vocation. So the Catholic error, and it was an error, is limiting the use of the term vocation to the clergy. If you ever spent any time in Catholic circles, when someone talks about vocations, they're just talking about the priesthood. That's it. It just doesn't apply to any other occupation. There are people with vocations, and then there are the rest of us. The Reformers said, no, that's not the way it works. Everything that we do can be done to the glory of God. Therefore, we all have vocations. We all have callings. So it's really important for you to discern your calling. Know what you've been called to do and apply yourself to it, and consequently that's the way you serve the Lord. Luther was great on this. Calvin was great on this. It's really important to keep that in mind, because what that did is it elevated work. It made work, it created a way of thinking about work that had a sanctity about it. This is something that God has established for me to do, and consequently I should give myself to it so that I glorify God through it. See what I'm getting at? So ultimately, we're all working for the Lord, not just the clergy. Now, I know in certain Protestant circles that kind of strong kind of distinction between the clergy and the laity is still there's still kind of a Roman Catholic hangover, but I think people need to get over it. I think the Reformed are absolutely right. I have no problem telling my Catholic friends, you've got this completely wrong. We're all called. This is something that's true for everyone. What this did is it revolutionized work. Familiar with the term Protestant work ethic? Do you know that there's no such thing as Catholic work ethic, or Muslim work ethic, or Hindu, or Buddhist? It's just Protestant work ethic. And there's a reason for that, because what it did is this approach to understanding work as service to God revolutionized the world. It's what was behind the Industrial Revolution. It was what was behind a great deal of the breakthroughs when it came to productivity. Now, Max Weber, I don't know if that name rings a bell. I don't care if it doesn't. He was responsible for studying this. He wrote a book entitled The Protestant Work Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism. Really important book. And what he noted, and I want you to hang with me on this because I think his observation might strike you as a little bit off, but I think he's actually onto something. What he said is that when it came to particularly the Reformed, meaning Calvinists, and where would you find Calvinists? You'd find Calvinists in Switzerland, Holland, Scotland, all over the United Kingdom. You'd find them in France, the Huguenots. You'd find them in Poland. They were all over the place. But anyway, what tended to occur when it came to the Reformed is a kind of status anxiety. And what Weber said is that because everyone was wondering, am I saved? The evidence of your salvation was what you lived like. And consequently, that included what you were doing at work. So there's this sense of anxiety that kind of sets in and characterizes Calvinist countries. This sense of, I need to be doing something productive. Even people who aren't observant Christians felt it. This is one of the ways that Protestantism leavened the countries that it was prominent in. You see it in the Netherlands. And by the way, each of those countries, particularly when it comes to England and Scotland and the Netherlands and so forth, those were the places where trade and the Industrial Revolution just took off. And even to this day, if you look at Northern Europe and compare the productivity of Northern Europe with Southern Europe, it's dramatic. The difference is dramatic. So there was this transformation, but it wasn't understood. Work wasn't understood as punishment. It wasn't understood as being something that we have to do because we're fallen. It was understood as something that provided evidence of your election, being on good terms with God. Because you were on good terms with God, you worked to serve Him, and you worked to be fruitful. That's another thing that's really important, to be fruitful. Not just to keep busy, not just simply toil, but to be productive. And so that productivity carried over into the New World. I don't know if you are aware, but all those people in New England were Calvinists. Among the Reformed, the joke is America owes its independence to Calvinists with guns. And they did have a lot of guns. In fact, I've got a friend, his name is Christian Cuthbert. He pastors a Congregational church in Connecticut, and he's actually an authority on Jonathan Edwards' war sermons. Probably familiar with Jonathan Edwards, right? Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God, Religious Affections. Were you aware that he preached a number of war sermons for the men in his congregation before they were to set out and fight? In the town, I've got a second house in Connecticut, in Tolland, Connecticut. That town is in one of the oldest parts of the European settled United States. And so that town is, I think, going on its 350th birthday. It broke off of another town that's about to celebrate its 400th birthday. But when you go to the town hall, they have the list of the war dead. In other words, all the men who died in wars from that town, Tolland. And the longest list is the French and Indian Wars. Why? Because the fighting was 20 miles down the road. That's why. They lived in the Wild West. The West just kind of moved west, by the way. So we think of ourselves as the Wild West here, but they experienced the Wild West there. And anyway, the point is that we have these Protestants who come to North America, settle in New England, and Alexis de Tocqueville, he wrote a book entitled Democracy in America, came to the United States in 1831 and 32 because he was a French nobleman. He had survived, the terror in France and all of the crazy stuff that was going on there. He actually came initially to study American prisons because American prisons were considered the most progressive prisons in the world. Imagine that. So he came here to do that, but he actually toured the United States and wrote about it. It's one of the most important studies when it comes to American thought and life that's ever been done. And in that book, he was really impressed with the productivity and the approach to life, particularly of the New Englanders. He said just the way their farms were organized, the way they went about their lives and their work impressed him. So that Roman Catholic had a good impression made on him by those New England Calvinists. Now, what I think we need to do when we think about our callings as Christians, when it comes to serving God through our vocations, is to remember that we're serving God through our vocations. And we're supposed to exercise dominion and glorify God. Exercise dominion. If you recall, in Genesis, when Adam and Eve are commissioned, we're told that they were the image of God, male and female, and that they were to exercise dominion. Being the image of God and exercising dominion is two ways of looking at the same thing. It's not as though you have one without the other. They go together, because what it meant to be an image is to be a representative. When you were, say, a diplomat in the ancient world, and you represented a crowned and royal authority, it was understood that you were that authority's image, representing the interest of that authority, and that's what our calling is. So we're to exercise dominion and do that. By the way, there's another marvelous question and answer in the Westminster Shorter Catechism when it comes to the nature of that work. We're asked in that catechism, what's the chief end of man? What's the chief end of man? And the response is to glorify God and enjoy Him forever. So it's through the exercise of dominion, representing God in the world, applying His authority in the world that we find ourselves in, that we glorify Him and we enjoy the relationship that we have with Him. Now, the Lord expects a return on His investment. Have you thought about that? I think most of the time when we think about the parable of the talents, that's more or less lost on us. I think one of the things that's tacit in that parable is the fact that the master expects a return. And consequently, he expects a return from you and me. We're an investment that he's made, and he expects a return. You remember how the story goes. There's a man who's going on a long journey, and he entrusts his talents. Now you know where the term talent came from and how it's applied today. He entrusted his talents to 3 guys. One guy, who was the most talented in more than one way, was given 5. There's another guy, less talented, he gets 2. There's a guy that's not very talented at all, he gets 1. And so, master goes away, you know how the story goes. 5-talent guy earns 5 more, he's now 10-talent guy. 2-talent guy earns 2 more, he's now 4-talent guy. 1-talent guy, he's afraid he's going to lose the talent, he buries it in the ground, preserves the talent, but there's no return. That's the thing, there's no return. So when the master returns, he says, okay, it's time to settle accounts. How'd you guys do? 10-talent guy reports, and 10-talent guy gets this commendation. Good job. You've done a lot with a little. Enter into the joy of your master, which means essentially you're now a junior partner. Come on in, you're now a junior partner in the firm. Second guy, 2 talents more, Good job. You've done a lot with a little. You're now a vice president in the family firm. Third guy comes along, scared, insecure. Says, I didn't lose it. Here's your talent. I knew that you were a hard man, and I didn't want to let you down. So that's why I didn't risk anything. I didn't put your money at risk. I didn't do anything with it. I just brought back to you what you gave me. And then the master says, wicked, lazy servant. You should have at least given it to someone who knew what to do with it, and instead of just like sitting on it the way you did. Take that from the guy. Take the 1 talent from 1 talent guy and give it to 10 talent guy. Isn't that interesting? Now, I think a lot of people are like, their heart goes out to 1 talent guy. Oh, I feel so sad for 1 talent guy. And I hate the 10 talent guy. I mean, he's always winning. He's probably captain of the football team and everything, Why do the winners always win and the losers get, lose and all that kind of stuff? That's kind of getting lost in the weeds. The point is, there's an expectation. And the expectation is no matter what you've received, you're supposed to bring a return. So that's something to keep in mind. And another thing to keep in mind is that through our vocations, we serve our neighbors. We don't only serve the Lord, we serve our neighbors. We make ourselves useful to them. So like when you actually know how to do things, you're useful. If you don't know how to do anything, you are useless to people. So the more you develop when it comes to your talents, the more you have to give and the more that you can do when it comes to serving those around you. So loving God and loving our neighbors is made possible through this exercise of God's talents that He's invested in us. And when we use them the way that we should to glorify Him, then we're not the only ones who are enriched. God's kingdom is enriched. Our friends and relatives are enriched. Now, what I'm getting at here is we really can't live without work. And even though Elon Musk, in his fever dreams, and I'm not saying that the things that he's talking about are going to come to pass, but I do think we need to at least consider the fact that he's working at it. He's working at it, and there are people who are buying into the idea. We live in a world where we're going to have to fight to stay working. I don't know how it's going to work out. I don't know, how these different technologies are going to be put to use. But like I said, you're going to use them. I was just talking to Vitaly yesterday, in fact, Philip's partner, and we were going over the business plan and stuff like that. And I said, "Have you tried to use AI in this area? Have you tried to use AI in this area?" Because I've been studying the thing for now a year. I know a lot of stuff about AI. I think you could find some products that'll help you in this area. I think you can find. So I'm not against it, but I do think we need to be jealous. Jealous is not a bad word. Jealous simply means that you have a right to what's yours. You have a right to what's yours. We serve a jealous God. He has a right to His people. He doesn't put up with any rivals. He says, "You worship me, no one else. I'm a jealous God." I think when it comes to work, I don't think we can abdicate. I don't think we can abdicate the image and the calling that we've received. We're going to have to get really creative, though. We're going to have to think hard about how we use this stuff. And we're going to have to evaluate it and judge it and not be just swept along by it. That's the thing I'm most concerned about. Some of the goofy things that people are saying about just sort of like walking into this Star Trek world where we don't have to do anything and everybody just gets to play, video games all day. I mean, I come across that stuff. I'm like, you want to live like the people in Kuwait? Here, I've got a documentary for you. Check it out. Anyway, I do believe that we win. I believe we win because Christ has won. And I am actually a postmillennialist, but I'm not a Pollyanna postmillennialist. What I mean by that is I think that even postmillennialists need to recognize that things can go bad sometimes, and they can be challenging for a long time, and we need to be able to deal with that. We win, but Frodo and Sam won too. There was a lot they went through before they got to the end. So let's keep that in mind. And again, I'm hopeful, but I do think we're going to need to be savvy, and we can't let the machines replace us. Thanks.